Hey there, YouTube, and welcome to the third installment of Pastor Stu's book review. Today we're going to be looking at a book entitled The Gift of Wonder, Creative Practices for Delighting in God by Christine Aroney-Sine. And Christine is the founder and facilitator of GodSpace online community, which I'll post a link to that below. There's a lot of information and resources and things that you can gain from their site, so you can check that out. Along with her husband and fellow author Tom Sine, she's also the co-founder of Mustard Seed Associates, from which they've both retired from, in order to devote more time towards building their community and engaging in speaking responsibilities. She considers herself a contemplative activist, and she's got a strong passion for really helping others develop creative practices to really enrich and better their spirituality, which, as we get into the details of the book, you're going to see that play out as she lays out different practices and ways to really engage God through the use of things like nature and reflection and meditation and art and music. If you would like, you can check out the GodSpace website, as I said, where you can check out her blog, and I will link her Amazon page, which has some of her earlier books, and I will also place a link below for this book, because for whatever reason, this book is not listed on her actual author page. But if you want to check it out and get a hold of it, the link for both areas as far as what she's written and this book will be posted below. So, without further ado, let's move right on into our review. As always, we like to start with understanding the premise behind why the book was written in the first place. Basically, as we look at this, this is the problem as the author sees it. And from reading the introduction and the understanding of why this book was written, in The Gift of Wonder, Christine Aroney-Sine seems to propose that Christian spirituality tends to lose its appeal as people age because of an abandoning of childlike wonder, whether it's through personal experiences or whether it's through just the maturing process. We tend to set aside childish ways, all of them, to our detriment to some degree, as she seems to see it. So, in order to correct this and to address it, she seems to suggest that by adding creative practices, she can help the readers re-engage with their childlikeness in order to develop a more meaningful and vibrant relationship with God. She's suggesting that she is increasingly convinced that rediscovering our inner child is essential for our spiritual health, and she cites some resources from psychologists and sociologists that have done studies on the importance of play and the role that plays in our development just mentally. In her introduction on page 7, Christine states that the question which shapes the whole book is, what are the childlike characteristics that bring God joy and make us fit for the kingdom? And it's her goal to introduce practices which will stimulate the more creative side of our humanity, and this is very reminiscent of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was very big into incorporating the entirety of our existence, or the entirety of our makeup, mind, soul, body, and imagination as well. So she builds on this idea. As far as the format goes, this book's different from the previous two texts that we've reviewed, in that its aim is at being a resource to use alongside regular devotional practices, typically with a journal in hand. And even in the introduction, she explains the importance of having a journal and pencils and crayons and any other kind of artistic materials you may need to do devotionals in a bit of a different way. So when we talk about an artistic journal, this is not so much written out narrative as much as it is poetry or pieces of art or song lyrics or whatever that might look like in your own life as you work through your spiritual walk with God in those devotional times. She relies heavily on personal stories and the experience of others, and she focuses her information on turning the reader's attention towards God in a more intentional way. Each chapter also begins with a poem which I believe is written by Christine herself, and throughout each chapter she also places questions which serve the purpose specifically of causing the reader to slow down, reflect, and turn their attention towards God and how He desires them to interact with the world. Finally, each chapter concludes with a description of a practice to try, which she applies individually and in a group setting. So, it is a little different in terms of what we have reviewed. The other two books that we've looked at have been very straightforward information and more cerebral than they are creative. This is more creative, and it's going to be an interesting thing. And without further ado, we're going to enter at this point into the full review. Alright, so just a reminder as far as the reviews go, my reviews are based on an average from 3 different categories. We focus on theological, which means does it offer an accurate portrayal of God according to what we find in the pages of the Bible. Secondly is practical, is the book easy to understand and apply to everyday living? And discipling, basically is the text a good one to use for training up believers? Because I believe that training people in the way they should go as far as following Christ and living a life devoted to Him is super important when it comes to our spiritual walk. So let's just kick it right off, and we will focus first on our theological aspect as we usually do. Keeping in mind here with this book, it was difficult to focus theologically on what this book is, just because it's not specifically written to deal with a full-on understanding of God, His character, the church, anything like that, but more on the practical aspect of spiritual practices. I've got to be a bit more creative in how I approach reviewing this component, just because, understandably so, the theological aspect is reintroducing a childlike faith. So there's not a whole lot in terms of technicalities and specifics in terms of theological ideas. She does refer to Scripture in order to complement her use of the practices that she lays out in the text. You'll find Bible passages throughout as she seeks to help the reader understand and connect why she's approaching the information the way that she is. Her main focus of the book is around the idea of little children coming before Christ and building on that idea. She offers childlike traits that should be reincorporated into our own spiritual lives as we all seek to follow God and to connect us through the world that He created. Her use of Scripture in that context is accurate, but it is very heavily focused on feelings. There's a lot of imagination thrown in, a lot of feeling type approaches to these things, which for those that are more cerebral in how they handle information, more logical, more analytical, they may have a hard time connecting with her here, just because it is very much that creative side where the focus isn't so much on let's be theologically accurate as it is on let's connect with God at the deepest relational level that we can. So it is very different in that regard. Christine also pulls a lot of stories from Jesus' life and encourages the readers to purposefully seek out interpretations of Scripture that may seem a bit upside down or backwards. While I understand her reasoning here, I would say be cautious. Suggesting something like this could lead to a really bad place when you start asking someone to look at familiar Bible stories that have a very, very different interpretation from what has been. Not that all different interpretations are wrong, but there are some pretty destructive ideas out there that present God or present Jesus in a way that they're not meant to be, that He's not meant to be experienced and presented. Just because of that, because it's not technically a theological book, and even with that suggestion from her, I'm going to rate it, which is pretty low on theological. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 for the theological component. Simply put here, this book's not something you're going to hand someone in order for them to gain a deeper insight into more technical aspects of God or Christianity. I'm not saying that she's way off the mark on theology, but just because of what I think about when I think of theology, I can't rank her at a 5 on the theological component here, because you can get into some dangerous areas when you put more of a focus on the emotional and the creative side. So you just have to be cautious with it. Not that she was off or bad in her understanding, just something to be aware of. Our next focus is on the practical aspect. Now, I would say as far as I go, I am constantly in books looking for something that is practical, hands-on, that you can really apply to your life. And while I look for that, I think she nails it here. With each chapter ending in a form of exercise, that the reader can practice and put into play in their own spiritual life. This is just a really practical book to pick up. Each of the examples of the exercises is well explained. It gives you a good insight into what the goal is for that exercise, and it's a good way to really revitalize what could be a very not as exciting prayer life or devotional life. She focuses a lot on utilizing quiet spaces, sacred spaces, and she encourages reflection on things like nature and art and music and so many other mediums to build a vibrant prayer and contemplation life. On an individual basis, the book would be easy for a person to devote a chapter a week to. So you could read through a chapter and then you take the exercise and apply it for 1 week in order to see if it's something that fits you or not. So there's a lot to be gained from a personal walk with Christ. And the suggestion that she offers for group settings is basically taking the same exercise and how you can branch out. So if you're running a small group and this is a text that you want to use to help people build their spiritual life, she does a good job of explaining how you can take the exercise at the end, invite friends in, and really do something meaningful with that time. Based on what she's provided in the chapters, as well as the explanation of the exercises she offers, I'm going to rate this a 5 out of 5 for practicality. I don't think there's anyone that would pick this book up that wouldn't be able to apply at least one, if not all, the exercises that she's put in there on a regular basis. And just the creativity that she has, and not only the exercises at the end of each chapter, but each chapter is actually full of different ideas that you can use, things that she has done in ways that she's kind of changed and added a creative approach to either hers or someone else's lifestyle, of spiritual lifestyle. And so for that, definitely high marks, and I give her 5 out of 5 for practicality. I think she does a great job there. Our last rating is definitely in the realm of discipleship, and this is based on the question of whether or not this book can be used in a mentoring or training type of environment, either one-on-one or in a group. And in my opinion, I would say, yeah, it's best used that way. As if you're a leader of a church and people are coming to you constantly with what are more creative or better ways for me to connect with God, or what are some different ways that I can reach out and really develop this relationship with God, instead of just saying the typical prayer, journal, meditate, you can incorporate those things, but you can offer things like, she mentions finger labyrinths, which were a really neat idea to help focus. Actual labyrinths, which some churches do have, that are usually laid out and gives you a chance to just focus and walk and be with God. She talks about garden spirituality. She talks about so many different ways to develop these things in your life. So I think it does fit well in a teaching, mentoring type situation, even one-on-one as a mentoring type thing. My only hesitation is going to be for those that tend to be more cerebral in their processing. If a person is analytical, if a person is more fact-oriented, and that's just where they are spiritually, and that's where they gain their relationship with God, these practices may not fit well with who they are and their walk with God. So if you're not more creatively wired and you're more analytically minded, and statistics and facts and figures and things like that are more for you, I don't know if you would get much out of this. You may see it as flighty, or you might see it as, just a little too weird for who you are. But it's not to say that you couldn't get something out of it. You just may have a hard time. So while I believe the creative approach to spirituality is a necessity in our lives, I understand completely that it's not for everyone. And that's something to really take into account. For those that are more creatively focused, or even if you're not, but you're up for a challenge, I would definitely say that this is a valuable resource for discipling others. When people get stuck analytically, there can be great value and benefits to accessing the more creative side in the imagination, because even stats and figures, even if you like that stuff, can get dull over time, just because repetition and patterns, they wear out, they get... that's why we have to be careful with church practices and things like that. We don't want them to lose meaning. So because of the limits, though, on who this could appeal to, I'm going to say that this text, this book, is going to receive, as far as a discipleship rating, a 4 out of 5 for that. And that's really only because I know it's not going to meet the needs of every person that picks it up and reads it. So as far as the overall score and concluding thoughts here about the book, when we consider the 3.5 out of 5 for theology, the 5 out of 5 for practicality, and the 4 out of 5 for discipleship, I'm going to give The Gift of Wonder, Creative Practices for the Delighting in God, by Christine Aroney-Sine. I'm going to give her a rating of 4.2 out of 5, which is really good. Overall, this is a really enjoyable and inspiring read. As I was reading through, there were a lot of things there that really stood out as far as just practices to help build things like gratitude and to build trust and with God and things like that that really stood out. And I do want to take some time here to really pinpoint Chapter 9, which is in which Christine titled Rest in the Moment, where she focuses on the importance of Sabbath. She focuses on the importance of resting in our lives. In the midst of a culture that doesn't value it, this chapter served as an important reminder of how vital it is for us to take time to focus on breathing, push aside worries and anxieties, and just to allow ourselves to imagine being wrapped in the embrace of God. It was a really encouraging chapter for me, a good reminder that sometimes, as hectic and crazy as life gets, we've got to take time to rest. And it's really just a small glimpse of the wealth of information and years of ministry experience that Christine has to offer those who may be looking for a more creative and contemplative approach to their spiritual life. So when your prayer lists and your daily Bible readings and stuff like that get a little dull and boring and repetitive, these are good ways to just tie in something creative there. I would definitely highly recommend picking up this book for the purpose of a book club or a Sunday school class, small group, really any type of teaching setting, or even an interactive sermon series, which would be interesting for someone to do. On an individual basis, it also works well to just enhance those quiet devotional times as you seek to turn what are even everyday practices into spiritual opportunities, where I know she mentioned knitting was a thing that she did, or gardening, and these are things that really helped her connect to God as she had her hands in the soil or as she was sitting there knitting, and able to just kind of quietly reflect. So definitely, if you're able to, give it a shot. Great book, great read. And that's going to do it for this review. So tell me what you think in the comments below. If you had a chance to read it, let me know what your thoughts about it are. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? You can post that all down below in the comments. And you can also let me know what you're reading and what books you would like to see me review in the future. I'm always open for suggestions and ideas. So bring them to me and I'll take a look at those. Obviously, as always, if you'd like to support this channel and would like to see more of this material, click that subscribe button and like the video. That helps build the channel. It helps me along. And just so you know what to look forward to for next week. Next week we're going to be looking at, it's a very different take. We went creative and kind of hopeful here. Next week we're going to be looking at Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, Discovering the Grace of Lament by Mark Vrogop, I believe is his name. So until then, guys, keep the faith and remember that you are deeply cherished. Blessings to you all.